case, while a California judge largely denied requests made by Peterson's team to retest evidence for DNA last week, including parts of a mattress found in a burned-out van near the Peterson home and a length of plastic string found tied in what they say was a bow around the neck of the unborn son, Connor, which was more likely just tangled. She did approve of one of the 14 items requested by his team, a piece of duct tape that was found on Lacey's pants at the time of her autopsy. A portion of the tape was tested in 2003, was shown to have human DNA present, but the testing available at the time was not able to provide, quote, an acceptable quality to generate a profile. Peterson will be back in court on July 15th, where the defense expected to request additional evidence that they were unable to find in the original trial files, including they're going to ask for evidence from the investigations into a December 2002 burglary of a home across the street from the Petersons' house, Laci Peterson's missing watch, information on a van fire in the airport district near their home on December 25th, 2002, and documents from interviews with several witnesses they could not locate in the files. Joining me now is Jon Buehler, former detective on the Scott Peterson case, and Lara Yeretsian, an attorney who represented Scott Peterson in the case. Thank you both for coming on the program. Appreciate it. All right, Jon, let me start with you. We've talked about this before, but now the judge has ordered retesting. Your position has been fine for them to retest. You don't have any problem with that. But what do you make of the items that they're not retesting? I mean, they've been very focused on this idea of a burglary across the street, this van that was burned out, and suggesting that you and your team never investigated it.
Yeah, you know, Dan, I've heard that over the years, that they said the burglary wasn't investigated, and it's totally wrong. All you have to do is look at the documents that came into court and thoroughly investigated. The guys copped to it. They were polygraphed on it. Property was recovered, and of all the property that was recovered, there was never one piece of property from any of the burglaries these guys were associated with that could be linked back to Laci. And as far as the judge, you know, deciding that, you know, this duct tape needs to be retested, you know, great, you know, and actually I'm okay retesting anything. It doesn't really make any difference to me. Anything that might prove that he's innocent, if that's a possibility, which it doesn't seem like to me, should be done. But when you take a look at this duct tape and any of the debris that was found around the bodies, that's just what the stuff is. It's debris, and it may not even be associated with the bodies. It may have been found and recovered in the same area where they washed up on shore.
Yeah, Jon, I was asking one of the jurors on this case this question. As you think back on the case, you summarize the evidence that was presented, what was the most convincing evidence to you of his guilt?
His demeanor after we told him that Laci and Scott had been confirmed dead through DNA, and then just several minutes later making his order at In-N-Out Burger for, you know, something to eat. The fact that he could just so cavalierly ask for a double-double with cheese and a small fry and a vanilla shake after he'd just been given this horrendous news convinced me that he was involved in it, because who does that? Yeah, there were a lot of other things. Of course, Amber coming in, his claim that, you know, is going to be the first Christmas without his wife, and, you know, making the claim that she was missing before she was, things like that. You know, it's just a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence that really weaved and painted a very vivid picture.
Lara, let me play you. This is the prosecution arguing in this case that this is just a way to drag it out, and I want to get your response to it. This is number 14.
We told the court in 2013, when the defendant asked for the DNA testing of a hair fragment and a hair that was found on the tape in the leg of Laci's body. We told the court that it was contaminated based on it being in the bay, being found at the dog park, the number of different hairs that were on there from dogs. And we were right then, and we're right now, when we are indicating that this is inappropriate for the defense to continue to try and find things to drag this case out.
Lara, why isn't this just an example of the defense just trying to drag this thing out?
This is not an example of defense dragging this on. This is a man maintaining his innocence. And it's a no-brainer, if you ask me. If his defense team is asking to get a number of items tested, and if the prosecution is so confident in their case, why object? Why try and prevent these items from being tested? That's the part that's mind-boggling to me, especially that the cost is not going to be on the state or the courts. It's something that is going to be paid by a grant that, the Los Angeles Innocence Project has. Again, it's a man who's been in custody for 20 years and has continuously maintained his innocence, and an investigation has been ongoing, and a lot of exonerating evidence has come forth to give reason for a lot of this testing. And I'm hoping that soon, once once the discovery motion is heard, more evidence can be heard and come out and give more credence to some of the arguments that they had for the DNA testing. And maybe they'll come back with a motion for reconsideration. We'll see. But at least we've got one win, right? We've got one item that's going to be tested, and that's a great start.
You mentioned a lot of exonerating evidence has come out. I haven't seen any of that, right? I mean, what is the actual evidence that's come out that is exonerating?
I think the one key thing that is, let's call it the elephant in the room, is the Medina burglary. The prosecution theory was that the Medina burglary occurred on the 26th, December 26th, 2 days after Laci's disappearance. But in reality, evidence points to the idea that it actually did occur on the 24th, the morning of Laci's disappearance. We've got the mail that these burglars claimed that they saw the morning of the burglary, and we know that the mail was picked up the morning of the 24th. And that's why some of these items were being asked to be tested, right? So that's a big deal. If in reality, if this burglary happened the morning of Laci's disappearance, imagine the jury hearing that evidence and the impact that would have had on them. A bunch of guys who were burglarizing their home and being confronted by a pregnant woman versus the husband who went on a fishing trip to the Bay. I think they would have given it a lot more thought than what they did here.
John, what do you make of that?
Well, I can't disagree with her on that, but the fact remains there was no witnesses that saw Laci scream and yelling. There was an argument taking place. She was fighting to not be thrown in a van. There wasn't her dog barking and things like that. And although Lara gets part of it right, there are a couple of things that came in here. The burglary occurred over 2 days. The first day, when one of the burglars went in the house on the 25th, he couldn't take all the property he wanted. They returned on the 26th. By that time, the media was out in front. They even noticed and remarked about the media out there, not sure exactly what they were doing at the time. They weren't aware of apparently what was taking place with the Petersons. So when you take a look at these things, then you also have to run into the the logical conclusion is, if they did abduct her, why didn't they just leave her on the beach there, by Berkeley Marina? Why did they put her in the water and weigh her down? Because that's what the evidence supports: the missing limbs, the decomposition of the body, not being located for between 3 and 6 months, or 3 and 4 months, I think is what the prosecution forensic pathologist said is her time in the water. All these things. You're not going to put steps forward to hide a body if you're trying to frame somebody. You're going to leave it on the shore. So I got to agree with Lara on a couple other things as far as testing the evidence. Test anything they want. If there's a possibility that it is going to help Scott, go ahead and do it. I'm confident it's not going to happen.
Lara, go ahead. You wanted to weigh in.
But Detective Buehler, what you're forgetting is, in this case, we have Diane Jackson, the neighbor, who actually saw men dragging out a safe and a van that was outside of the Medina's house on the 24th. There's that in itself is huge, and there's more to it. I know you're talking about early on. You mentioned about how the demeanor, Scott Peterson's demeanor, and I heard that also from the juror who was on this jury that convicted Scott Peterson. People behave in different ways. I've seen parents who have lost children who are in complete shock, and what they do is laugh and smile and tell jokes with people. Does that mean that they don't care? It's just that people behave in different ways. And in this case, yes, people focus on Scott's behavior versus the evidence. In fact, the lack of evidence. There was no forensic evidence connecting Scott to the crime whatsoever. This idea that the burglars, well, how come the body ended up at the Berkeley Marina? Well, everybody in the world knew Scott had been at the Berkeley Marina and at the Bay, and of course they were going to do that. What else would they do? Anybody with a hair, any type of brain, the smallest brain, would realize that the right thing to do to make sure that the person who's being suspected of the crime gets in trouble for this and gets arrested is to dump the body
Go ahead, John.
at the San Francisco Bay.
Gosh, I could do a whole program with you, Lara, on this stuff. A couple real quick corrections for you on that. The burglary on the 25th, he only could take the property that he took. And one of the things that came up on that is Diane Jackson. I don't believe she was ever called as a defense witness in this. So if her evidence was so relevant, I'm curious as to why your team didn't bring her in. Also, when we originally talked to her, I think her description of the van went from white to tan to brown. And so we had so many discrepancies with this. And in addition to that, she didn't know Lacey before this event took place. And there's a big difference between somebody who knows a neighbor by sight and by facial recognition and a neighbor that maybe saw something and could confuse her easily with somebody else. But the fact that Jackson said she saw these guys bringing the safe out on the 25th, well, that's not true.
Well, the reason that we didn't bring, she wasn't allowed to testify is because your team or the prosecution had her hypnotized, and for that reason, her testimony could not come in. And I believe one of the detectives testified as far as what she had seen.
Wait, John, the reason she wasn't allowed to testify was because she was hypnotized?
Well, I don't remember her being hypnotized. I remember one of the detectives
she was hypnotized.
did what I think he called a cognitive interview with her. And I don't remember the term hypnotized coming in on it. At least this is the first time I've heard that. I think the term that they used was a cognitive interview that they did on her. But regardless on that, if her information is solid and if there's other exculpatory evidence that supports it, bring her in.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.